a great conversation today about statewide longitudinal data systems. We have some good folks, and I'll introduce them in just a second. But in the meantime, we are going to do our normal intro where we talk about, sorry, just opening this up, where we talk about what's happening in research. You all have a chance to share any resources that have come across your desk that you think this would be really helpful for the SPDIGs, such as anything about professional learning, about training and coaching, etc. And then I'll turn things over to our speakers today. So as always, we are part of a, well, not as always, this is a series. This is our Learning Lab series. And I think one nice thing that I've learned over time, one of the people I've learned it from, is it's nice to think of your work at times as an experiment, right? Like, we're doing this experiment, let's see how this works. And this Learning Lab series has been an opportunity to learn about innovations, kind of go in some different directions, and think about, what can we take and use in the projects or as SIG Network overall from these various areas. So we already did connecting before content. We'll do the research minute. I'll ask you if you have anything to share. And then we'll talk about the statewide longitudinal data system and what does it mean for SPDIG work potentially. So research minute, IES and Institutes of Higher Education, or sorry, Institutes of Education Sciences. I think I got that generally right, Nancy. They just released a report on the Striving Readers Comprehensive Literacy Program. It is no longer called that. So if you've been following along with program names in the U.S. Department of Education, this is now the Comprehensive State Literacy Development Program, which currently has a competition open and running. If you have questions about that, I will connect you with Michael Berry, who oversees that. So this was a study of Striving Readers. So it's a few years back, but the kind of impact it had, what implementation looked like, what did we learn from it? You are welcome to look at the study. I'll put the link in the chat in just a second once I stop sharing. But I wanted to pull one piece out of it specifically. And that was because one of the main purposes of Striving Readers was to ensure that the science of reading was happening on the ground, right? That folks were using evidence-based curricula, evidence-based programs. And when they studied it, and this was looking at the 2018-19 school year, what they found was only 12% of sites who were receiving funding for Striving Readers were using any kind of curriculum or program that had a strong or moderate evidence review rating, as by the What Works Clearinghouse or ESSA evidence. 88% of programs were without strong or moderate evidence. And then it goes over here to the right, it talks about what that means, that 88% category. So 3% had promising evidence, 7% had null or negative findings, 18% that did not, there were studies, but the studies themselves did not meet their standard of rigor. 13%, there were no reviews of existing studies, and 47%, no published research identified. So I'll give you a second to take that in. And I looked at 236 programs. All right, so now your turn. How do you know, with the sites you work with, say early childhood programs, schools, districts, how do you know what the evidence base is of the materials being used? How do you interact with that aspect of it? Do you have requirements for it? Is it something that you assess in any way? Is there a survey where you ask questions about it? Are there requirements for even entering into a professional development agreement with you? And I'm gonna go ahead and stop sharing for a second, but I will put the question into the chat. And feel free to use your mic or use the chat. Either one works.
For Vermont, it's a requirement to, the training and coaching is all about high quality instruction and intervention using our MTSS framework. So the coaches and that's part of the training sequence is to look at their instruction and intervention practices, including their curricula.
Okay, great. Thank you, Meg. And is it okay if I ask you a follow-up question?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so, and you have, I'm guessing you work with them if, you know, if there's not a readiness there for certain things, you work with them to get to that point?
Yeah, exactly. For this SPDIG, we actually wanted the districts and schools that maybe didn't think they were ready to engage in this kind of work so that we could, even if we had to back up a little bit to get them ready, because we know those are the ones that are probably the neediest. The ones that are ready always get these kinds of opportunities in Vermont.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Meg. That's really helpful.
Mhm.
And thank you, Holly, for creating the high quality materials curricula, electing to use them. And I do understand SPDIGs don't usually have the ability, the project itself does not have the ability to go in and say, hey, district, use something totally different. Although you do have the ability to say, here's who we're going to work with ahead of things. Got the Rhode Island requirements. Great.
Jennifer, I'm going to give kind of a general answer, definitely when looking at, but there needs to be student outcomes tied to it. And so people actually utilizing the data, having a baseline at the beginning of the year and then going throughout at the end of so just those markers at mid-year, you look at that data, you check the student growth. So for me, that would be.
So I'm going to check my understanding. So even if there's not research to say that the curriculum, if they can show student outcomes, then they're still showing. Got it. Thank you so much.
Yes, exactly.
Good. And I think I would say, again, this is 2018. I would say things are changing with the science of reading. We looked at that a couple months ago at the Research Minute. We looked at states' science of reading policies and requirements. And I would say it's changing. I think we're to the point now that it's not just choosing evidence-based curriculum and programs. It's then, have you thought about how you are actually supporting the folks who are supposed to implement it? And are we in alignment with assessments that are going to be used? So I think we're in lots of ways a little bit beyond that, at least at the state level. But I think what happens on the district, the school, the early childhood program, those, they can be that can be a black box, right? We don't know what they're using. Like, we know how we assess them in these ways, but we don't necessarily know what they're using. Yeah. In Colorado, actually, Veronica, it's funny you say that, because I know Mary Spencer worked on No Child Left Behind reading first in Colorado, right, Mary?
Right.
Yeah, I was in the classroom for 17 years. And when I transitioned it from music education intervention, I had to take the science of reading. And I don't think that was even until 2019, 2020. So this was even before Colorado was mandated to do it. So
Great.
I would like to see what the outcomes are now, to be honest.
Right. Absolutely. And then Tammy, she asked they asked what curriculum districts are using for core interventions, apply for MTSS. Good. Be curriculum for core interventions. Good. This is really helpful. Thanks everyone for sharing. It's interesting to see. And I agree, we've come a long ways. All right. So that was your Research Minute. And now you get a chance to share what resource, anything you've come across, an article, that you think has been especially helpful that you want to share with others? And I'll share one in the chat. Some of you were in a coaching community of practice a few years back, and we created a readiness for coaching assessment. So if you were working with the school, you could have them self-assess, and you'd understand, here are some areas to look out for that they might not be ready, like how open are the teachers in the classroom to having someone come in and observe them, that kind of thing. And this is for school leaders, that one of OSEP's model demonstration projects for coaching created that I thought you might be interested in. Any other resources folks want to share in the chat or verbally?
I'll just share verbally. We are having Jennifer Pierce come to our state to do a training on coaching for systems and instructional change. So in a couple of weeks, so that's really exciting. As a follow-up, she was at the SPDIG national meeting in last fall. So we're just excited that we'll get to see Jennifer Pierce. We're working with AIR as well, but excited for our conference and kind of follow up around that coaching piece.
Excellent. And for those, because we know we have at least a few new people, right? She talked about using data with your coaching to assess how, talked about using coaching logs, various pieces of data to evaluate it. It was such a good presentation. Unfortunately, it was live, so we don't have it recorded, but I have her slides if anyone needs those. Good. Excellent. Thanks, Tammy. All right. Well, data is what we're all about today, so that's perfect. We have someone who is returning to us after being gone at least a couple months, Kaylee Bunch-Woodson, who was the former project director for Idaho, and Lexi Pease. She trained up, got ready Lexi Pease, who's now doing a great job. I'm sure you are aware of that, but also happy to hear it, Kaylee. And we also have Carla Howe, and she is the lead TA provider for the statewide longitudinal data system program that is overseen by Nancy Sharkey, who is at IES, and it's NCES, which is the National Center on Education Statistics. Thank you. It's always a little test when you always see acronyms and you have to say them right away. So they're each going to introduce themselves at a little more length, and they will share the first concert that they went to if they haven't already. So just a little reminder of, in case you didn't read the blurbs we sent out, or you just have already forgotten what happened 5 minutes ago, like I do. The statewide longitudinal data system, you're going to learn more about it from them. But one of the reasons we're interested in having them come is that a lot of the SPDIGs, want to build a data system or feel the need to build a data system, or they want to build a data dashboard, or they feel like, oh, there's some pieces of data we just don't have accessible to us. And so we want to think about what is possible with the SLDS, what some states are doing with it, and perhaps if your state's not doing work in the SLDS right now, they might apply for a grant in the future, or maybe you'll become aware of things that are being done with statewide longitudinal data systems that you can plug into so that you don't have to collect new data yourself. So with that, I will turn it over to Carla, Nancy, and Kaylee.
Great. Well, I'll introduce myself first, just to kick things off for us. Again, Carla Howe, nice to see all of you. I am, as Jennifer mentioned, I direct our technical assistance state support team. So we are a group of experts who help state education agencies, and we are folks who were formally in roles at state education agencies, working with longitudinal data systems and the other programs, trying to make good use of all of the data that might be in systems. And so we look forward today to sharing some examples with you and, hoping to help you think about the art of the possible and make some connections today.
I'll jump in and introduce myself. I'm Kaylee Bunch-Woodson. As Jennifer said, I was the former SPDIG director in Idaho, and it's so good to see so many of you that I miss so much. But I'm loving my new role as a TA provider. I'm not with the SLDS program, but I work for the same company that Carla does, which is how I connected Jennifer and SPDIG to the SLDS program. I'm a TA provider for the IDEA Data Center and the National Center on Educational Outcomes. And so my role today is going to be to sit back, relax, and let Carla and Nancy take it out. So thanks, Jennifer, for letting us come and crash your party. I told you when I left, before I left, that you'd be seeing a lot of me if I had my way. So it seems like I'm getting my way.
And it actually, I think it took less than a month for someone's like, you know what? I would love for you to meet this colleague of mine. Her name is Kaylee. I'm like, huh, Kaylee, I wonder. And then it was, yeah. So took no time at all.
Well, hi everybody. I'm Nancy Sharkey, and it looks like as like type A data people that we are, we went in alphabetical order of first name and introductions without even talking about it ahead of time. I'm the team lead for the statewide longitudinal data system grant program at NCES. Like the state support team, our team also came from states. All three program officers worked in state education agencies and I think that's why we're at the Department of Education now. We got our feet wet, realized that there were issues that maybe we could work on at the federal level, and here we are. I'm thrilled to be able to speak with you all today about what the SLDS program does, what sorts of assistance we can provide, what sorts of activities we're engaged in, and even a little bit of information about what states are doing in this work. Because I think that a lot of our value, and I hope I'm not overstating, but I think a lot of our value is just connecting state folks to each other, both within states and across states. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak with you all today about what's going on in your own states and what's going on across the country. So the first thing we just wanted to talk about real quickly is just what is an SLDS, or a statewide longitudinal data system. Each state and territory has been awarded now at least one SLDS grant. And the point of these grants is to help states connect data from pre-K into workforce data to really get a sense of what's going on in that education pipeline for kids and their families. So some states are looking at questions that focus much more on instructional questions, or how many kids are going to college and why, and who are we losing along the way. Some states are focusing more on workforce questions. What are the workforce outcomes related to majoring in certain things in college or engaging in certain courses in high school. But everything that the states do is basically determined by the states. So I think what we'll do is we have a little video that'll give you a little bit more information about the SLDS program, because it probably says it in far fewer words than I do. So here we go.
Give me 1 second, because I realized I shared the PowerPoint, not my screen. So just one sec.
And I do not know how to tap dance, or I would do something.
And of course, there's an ad, so just 1 second. And let me reshare. And we'll cross our fingers about sound, but that will be one thing you all need to tell me if it works. And if not, we'll just drop the link for you, and we'll go from there. Can you hear anything?
Not yet.
No, unfortunately, we
Sound.
can see it, but we can't hear it. So
Yeah.
when you share, you should have an option to, under the sharing advanced, and I'm sorry I didn't walk through this with you before. Sharing advanced, you should have the option to share computer audio.
Okay. Oh yes, share sound. Perfect. Thank you. All right, let's try take 2.
Across the country, states and territories are working to provide better information to help their students succeed in the classroom and beyond. Statewide Longitudinal Data Systems, or SLDSs, combine data from across the state to help answer critical questions about student learning and outcomes, social programs and policies, workforce preparation, and economic development. The data included in SLDSs vary from state to state. An SLDS can cover a specific part of the education to career pathway or several parts. Many SLDSs include data from early childhood education and early care programs, K-12 schools, community colleges and four-year colleges and universities, and workforce programs and services. Some also incorporate data from health, social services, and public safety agencies. Data from these sources are shared and linked securely to create longitudinal records that can be used without identifying individuals. The agencies that contribute data govern how those data are managed, protected, and used. Statewide longitudinal data systems offer a number of benefits. They include data from an entire state, not just a single school district or program. Users can examine information for different geographic areas and for the state as a whole. SLDSs connect data from multiple education and employment programs to show the relationships among the programs and the stakeholders whom they serve. They also link data over time to allow users to measure progress and examine the relationships between earlier experiences and long-term outcomes. Statewide longitudinal data systems support students and citizen success in a variety of ways. Teachers can see their students' education history and plan their instruction accordingly. They can also identify and provide additional support to students who are at risk of failing or dropping out of school. School administrators can see how their graduating classes fare in post-secondary education and in the workforce. They can identify ways to better prepare students in the future, such as implementing programs that help teachers improve instruction, tailoring supports to student needs, and revising course offerings. Post-secondary institutions can assess how well their programs serve students with different K-12 experiences and align to workforce needs, as well as whether their graduates are prepared to contribute to high-demand career fields. By reviewing information available from the SLDS, students and their families can determine which early childhood programs, education services, schools, or degree programs will help them meet their academic and professional goals. Workers can decide which training programs and certifications will help them advance their careers based on wage and employment information from others with similar credentials. With SLDS data, researchers can help educators, policymakers, and the public understand more about the relationships among education and social programs and later outcomes. These analyses can help inform policies and programs on topics like educator preparation or college and career readiness. Lawmakers and policymakers can evaluate how best to allocate funds for early childhood, education, training, and workforce programs, as well as how to improve the policies that govern them. SLDSs also support more efficient operations and better policies across the state by improving data quality and streamlining required state and federal reporting. The information provided by an SLDS allows states to use evidence to answer questions about their education and workforce systems more effectively, and ultimately to better serve students and adults. For more information about statewide longitudinal data systems, check out these resources. 5 words.
Okay. And I'll get back to our presentation. And Nancy, back to you.
Yeah, well, thanks. Well, it's actually back to the audience. I think what we would love for folks to think about and respond to in the chat is what about this SLDS, or what did you learn from the SLDS video that was maybe new or surprising to you? You know, any like aha moments there, or anything you'd like us to be able to provide you with later.
And maybe with the size of our group, you could also, if you'd like, just come off mute. You could also just share verbally.
One question I have is, yeah, so Yasmin was saying that the workforce data is really interesting. Could you all talk a little bit more about what some of those workforce data might include? And the secondary question, a little bit unrelated, is because Tammy says she wants to track down Montana's SLDS. Oh, learn about how Montana's SLDS tracks and shares workforce data. So that's workforce, but also if they were to want to find the folks who work on SLDS, any pointers you have on how to do that?
Great. We did anticipate that as a question about the contact list. So we will have that ready to send back out. And maybe Jennifer, John, we could send that to you following this webinar so that it could be sent out to your attendees. Or if the way is to just reply all to the invitation, you know, whatever you think is best in that
You can
regard.
go ahead and send it to me, Carla, and I'll include it in a follow-up email to this meeting or this webinar.
Great.
Carla, I wonder if it would also make sense to send a copy of the latest stats in brief about what state capacities look like, because that will also give, we do an annual, now moving to semi-annual capacity survey of states where we ask what types of data they have in their system that can be linked to K-12 data. And then also there are some questions about what they're doing with that information. So if you are uncertain as to what your state capacity looks like, we could give you a little bit of information about that as well.
And I'll drop that link into the chat also right now. So folks could go there too if they're looking for something state specific. Great.
Right. So I mean, we could answer questions. Would folks, we could answer questions as we go. I think when it comes to sharing systems within a state at the individual level, I think some states have developed unique IDs that follow kids the whole way, like from pre-K into college. I think though connecting, some people seem to be focusing on workforce. I think connecting workforce data, especially for kids who haven't gone to college, is sometimes problematic for states because the K-12 information doesn't have a social security number often. And the post-secondary and workforce folks tend to use SSNs a little bit more. So there are states that have focused on using DMV records, Department of Motor Vehicle records, as the bridge between the K-12 information and the workforce information for folks who haven't gone to college. But it's not easy. I don't want to make it sound like, oh, they just do this. It's certainly not easy. Oh.
Yeah, and in the chat, I'm seeing some reference.
Yeah.
Great to see use with Montana's system, the GEM system, Connecticut. Yeah, Connecticut's P20W, which P20W, this is some of our jargon, P20 meaning from, you know, preschool, pre-kindergarten, that early childhood through either grade 20, the W being workforce. Sometimes there's a plus on there also, meaning it could have other information too. Great.
So is it possible to share data across states? I think it's possible. Is it easy or being done at this point? Not as much. We are working on another program called the Common Education Data Standards in the hopes of enabling states to have like this common vocabulary that would make it easier to look across states to see what's in data systems. And there are some states, particularly in the workforce level, combining or talking to each other to think about workforce outcomes, particularly when they have like shared labor markets. But I think when it comes to the whole looking across states, it's possible, but we're not there yet. Is how I would characterize it. All right, so we're going to step back a little bit and give you a little bit of just a grant program background and then some just basic information about what we do. So we were authorized in 2002 by ESRA, which was the Education Science Reform Act. That's what gave us the authority to do SLDS grants. The Educational Technical Assistance Act, which is part of ESRA, gave us the authority to do technical assistance for all states. The grants are cooperative agreements, which is nice because it gives us a little bit more interaction between the state and the federal government to adapt as state needs change. So you can imagine, some technology you proposed 4 years ago is now out of date. You've realized there's a better way to do things. So we do have a little bit of flexibility to work with states to make sure that the outcomes are what states proposed, but how they got there might be a little different than what they initially proposed in their grants. And they're, as we've already said, they're administered by IES in the Department of Education. This is a little bit about how we've evolved over time. The first couple of grant rounds in 6 and 7 were about helping states take all of their administrative data that they had for their K-12 students and put them into one longitudinal data system, focusing on those K-12 data. In 2009 through 12, we said we want to add additional data sectors to link to your K-12. And you can see that 35 states are now linking pre-K to their SEA data. 39 can link post-secondary. 19 states are linking workforce data to their SEA, to their K-12 data. And then 37 states say that they have a student-teacher data link in their systems. And those were established primarily between 2009 and 12. In 2015, we turned a corner, and I think this is where it gets maybe a bit more relevant for you all, is we said, well, okay, let's focus on a use. We've helped you put all of these data into one system. Now let's think about what you're going to actually do with the data. So many states have been working on infrastructure and interoperability to continue to improve the ability to produce information out of their systems. But some states looked at school poverty and student poverty. States have been looking into questions around college and career, what happens to kids in college and in the workforce. States have focused kind of more broadly on evaluation and research. Some states have looked into issues of equity. States are focusing on instructional support, so just making data available to school-based educators for decision-making. A handful of states have looked at early learning and early childhood education, and one state looked at education choice along the way. These priorities were all developed by talking with states. So if you're wondering, how did we come up with these things? We usually ask states, okay, if we're going to do another grant round, what would you like to see in it? And that's where we came up with those priorities. So every state and territory,
which Nancy maybe is a good plug too, to say, because we talk to states, and one of the things that we will be talking with you about is, making some connections in your own agencies, for future grant rounds, if, as you think about some of the professional learning work and such that you might like to see, laying some of that seed work now could be something, to begin percolating on.
Yeah, because we do have flexibility. So every state and territory now has received at least one grant. You can see some states have received multiple grants, but we are very happy to report that everybody has gotten at least one as of the last grant round, which was FY23. All right. So here's another question we had for you is do you know if your state or territory has had or does have an SLDS grant program? And do you know the staff in your organization? And as we've already said, we will provide you with the staff if you don't know them. So. Yeah. All right. We have some learning, which I'm glad we're here to provide some information about that. All right. So in addition to making SLDS grants, sorry, I just want to be cognizant of time here. But in addition to making grants to states, we also are able to provide technical assistance support to all states and territories, which is nice. So it's because it was, the legislative authority had those two pieces. One part was to make grants, but the other part was to provide support to all states and territories. So regardless of whether your state has a grant, you can get technical assistance. So that's something to know. The TA largely comes from the state support team, which, as Carla said, is a group of folks who have a great deal of experience working within and among states. And will provide TA on things like data governance, working with stakeholders, managing the project, thinking about how the project can be sustained after the grant is over, how to use the data, how to make your data and data policies more transparent, how to link data, manage vendors, think about system design and the technologies available, strategic planning, and then also how do you implement a research agenda and what would that look like with your stakeholders. We do individual assistance and multi-state assistance, and the individual assistance ranges from anything from, check-in calls and visits to talking about project plans and other documents and thinking about what state needs are and providing resources and training to match those needs. Multi-state assistance are where we bring a bunch of states together. So this includes the best practice conference, which we do annually. It's providing publications based on experiences in states. We bring together work groups and webinars and communities of practice, regional meetings, and the listserv. And then we also have a personal exchange network, which I think we have another slide on, so I won't tell you all about it yet. The SLDS resources are issue briefs, guides, state territory spotlights, webinar summaries. These are all based on experiences in states, and states often participate in the webinars and will summarize the webinars so that states can learn from each other. And they're all available on the website, which is there. And then we have the public domain clearinghouse, which is where states can share things with each other as well, as long as they're non-proprietary. But if a state has developed a way to create ID numbers, or a state has, written some code that'll generate a report, for example, that can be put in this clearinghouse so that folks can get access to it, which is another way that states can talk to each other. The Personnel Exchange Network, which I alluded to earlier, was probably, when I was working in the state, the most useful thing ever. This enables state staff to visit agencies in other states. So if you really are trying to figure out a process, or, how do we have this conversation with people, you could observe it in another state and carry what you've learned back to the state you're coming from. And as I said, when I was in a state, this was invaluable to figure out exactly what we were trying to do and how to do it. And as you can see, many states have participated in these. We also have communities of practice and work groups, and these are when states have shared interests or questions. We enable them to come together and focus more explicitly on what they're trying to do. These things, right now, we have work groups dealing with employment outcome measures, data governance, and information technology collaboration. So as you can imagine, sometimes you have to have the conversation with tech people when you're figuring out what you're doing with your data. So helping states manage that collaboration. There's a data standards-based infrastructure implementation group, and there's also scaling research with CDS. And these are just examples. We've had work groups in the past on military connected kids. We've
Lost your audio.
Oh.
It might be you,
Hear you,
Mary.
Nancy.
Yeah, I can hear it fine, Carla.
Okay. Okay, so I'll keep going. Okay, good. Okay, thank you. There are also complementary programs. So and you can get more information about these if you reach out to your state SLDS team, or if you reach out to us, we can put you in touch with these other programs. But we coordinate a lot with the Common Education Data Standard Project, the Center for the Integration of IDEA Data, which is reporting, FX reporting primarily. The Privacy Technical Assistance Center, so questions about student privacy, preschool development grants out of HHS, the National Forum on Education Statistics, which is a group of state and district folks thinking about high-level questions, and then also the EdFacts Partner Support Center, if you have ever any questions about reporting. Every state and territory has a dedicated state support team member. If you use this QR code, you could find out who you would reach out to in your state if you have questions about SLDS systems or the processes that you go through to build one. Yeah, so I think we have, check the QR code. All right, so the next step is just a couple of examples. I know you were interested in seeing what states are doing with data, what sorts of technologies and reports they have. So we've just pulled together a few brief examples, again, trying to be cognizant of time. But we have a couple of screen grabs from the Michigan system. It's their public portal for education data to help everybody, residents, educators, and policymakers make decisions. So we have a couple of screen grabs of information that's available on their public portal and a link to that as well. Oh, it's good. A couple of states have public portals. I think the more information, the better. So this is just sort of an example. Hawaii's DXB is their data exchange partnership. They have 5 state agencies that are working to think about education outcomes, including workforce in the state. We have a couple of screen grabs from them as well. What's interesting about the DXP is they have a research agenda that's very aligned to the work that the K-12 agency is doing on its SLDS grant. So there's a lot of communication between the groups. So the K-12 folks are focusing on instructional data, providing information to school-based educators to think about how to improve instruction for kids, while the DXP is then doing research on what the curriculum folks are doing in the K-12 agencies. So it's a really well-aligned K-12 and P20W system. The Kentucky Center for Statistics, or KY Stats, focuses a lot on bringing together education and workforce data so the policymakers, practitioners, and the public can make informed decisions as well. They've done a lot of work comparing, for example, the western part of the state and the eastern part of the state. It's concluded that they're basically have 2 labor markets with different educational needs to meet those labor markets and to improve outcomes for kids and their families. So it's another great example of how folks are using data. So I think the next couple of examples or at least the early warning system one is quite relevant. I know you were all asking, what do we do? How do we choose interventions, or how do you choose a curriculum? And I think the CNMI project, they're doing an early warning system where they too, they worked with their REL to figure out what the indicators should be to determine if kids were at risk or not. But then they also are doing research on the interventions that they're implementing to respond to the early warning system findings. And so when we think about how do we choose new things, or how do we choose interventions, CNMI is doing research on the interventions that it's implementing. Tennessee has a program evaluating education prep providers. This project was connecting the education preparation program to the teachers they were producing to the kids that those teachers were teaching, to do a feedback loop and say that, whether the education prep providers were successful at preparing teachers to teach reading or to teach math or to teach high school or to teach elementary school. This was tied to policy in that the education prep provider programs were being evaluated as part of their certification, the state certification of those providers. What was super interesting about that one is the providers had a ton of feedback and input into what the system would look like. And they were so happy with the system that a provider that was found to be lacking or not providing or not producing effective instructors was grateful for the dashboard and the information. So that was the level of feedback that they were able to provide. I've never been in a site visit where someone said, we got, like flagged, but we love the system. So they might be a state, if you're interested in stakeholder support to talk to. South Carolina is providing data to the Head Start providers, feedback again, to show how the kids who came out of these Head Start programs are doing when they get into the early grades of school. And they also have had lots of interaction with their Head Start providers to see what would be useful and what sorts of reports would be most effective in conveying that information. All right. So somebody asked before, how many students are doing this or what, how can we do this? There are some challenges to the work. The granularity of data is always a question, is whether the state has the information that they want to be able to connect or do research on. There's also sometimes the schools, the districts, and the states have different roles in this process. And I will say that the states that are doing the instructional work with their systems tend to also be the systems where the state is the district. So like CNMI or Hawaii, it's, I think, a little easier for them to dig into instructional questions because they are also the school district for the state. So navigating those relationships is key. States always have to struggle with data quality, especially if it's data that the state hasn't looked at or used before, just because the first time you use it is the first time you find the problems with it. So data quality can be a challenge. And then lastly, I think establishing a culture of data use at the state level or the district level or the school level always is something that has to happen in order for this not to just be a whole bunch of charts on the screen, and for it to instead be something that's driving policy and practice. So figuring out how to establish those conversations and establish a culture of data use is key for all of the stakeholders. All right, so I think our last thing can respond is what would you like to be able to do with data, and how might you support data use in your state? And again, you could just shout out or type, however you feel comfortable.
I'm just speaking of my experience as someone who was an educator for 19 years in Denver public schools, that coming to New Mexico, it just seems like the data, for one, is extremely siloed here. And the other thing that I'm finding is that the mindset that data somehow is an indictment. For some of these districts, it's hard to get the data. So that culture of being open, and we're trying to implement MTSS here too at the state level. But, there's many educators that they don't even, or MLSS for some of you that might know it by that. They're just uncomfortable with it, and they feel like it's more of an indictment rather than something that's supposed to be used in order to assist our educators on targeting their instruction and moving our kids to where they need to be.
Yeah.
Ria, I'm so glad that you said that, because I taught for nearly 20 years, and I agree, because data has been used as a gotcha and a getcha for so long with teachers who have just been given their hearts out to kids, and so teaching, because I work in Colorado and I'm an MTSS specialist at CDE, but I taught in a small rural district for 17 years, 17 and a half years, 2.5 years in Ohio. And it was at the end of my career at the school when we started using data to really, instead of dinging us at the school level, really using it to be like, okay, how can we change our instruction? How can we do data dives to see where kids are? And so how can we take that language and and share that with teachers around supporting the fidelity of their instruction and their practices. So yeah, I'm so glad that you said that.
Yeah, and this might be, this is, I think where talking to other states might be really helpful, because this is, I think, where a state like Hawaii has, I don't know if anybody from Hawaii is on the call here today, but they spent a lot of very thoughtful time working on how to provide a supportive environment for teachers to have what some folks think of as threatening conversations, and to shift from a gotcha to, okay, we're looking at data as another tool to help support our kids in their instructional and academic growth. So it might be, when we talk about putting you together with states or looking at the resources that are available on our website, I think it might be worth looking at Hawaii just to see how they really nurtured those conversations and relationships among instructional staff. And it's taken years. I don't want to say this is easy work. Hawaii is one of these states that's had quite a few grants, and they've had a lot of time to think about this and kind of grow their program over time. They might be worth looking up. All right, I know we're at time, so I don't know who else wants to weigh in here, but I do want to thank you, and I would strongly encourage you to either reach out to us if you have specific questions about specific topics, or look at our website to see what sorts of resources are available about the questions you're interested in. You could just search by keyword and resources will pop up. If you have any additional questions, please reach out to me. I'm nancy.sharkey@ed.gov. And as you can see, I'd love to talk about this stuff. So I'd be happy to talk further.
Yeah. And we do have time, Nancy, because we go till 4:30. So we have time for conversation. And I think there were a few questions that didn't get answered. And sorry if they were included in your answer to something else. One was from earlier, and it was about how do families have access to the data? So have you seen any states who are about families access?
The states that have public websites, obviously I think the parents have access to the public websites. There are some states that we're working on providing specific individual parent access to the systems. I think that's a little bit more complicated, just because if you're trying to look at your own students' data, then every parent needs a login. And I think states found that a little difficult to manage. But yeah, for the most part, I think it's a state that have the public websites where the parents can get information. But certainly some states have information about, I want to say like Mississippi and a couple of other states too, were providing information like, if you want to you want this job, then you could look at the state website to see where what credentials or coursework you would need to get that job. And then they connected that to the colleges, so you could see which colleges and community colleges provided the training in those fields, so that you could qualify for the job. And then it went so far as to look at the earnings that you could make if you stayed in Mississippi versus if you went to a nearby state, so that you could see if you could stay in the state or move out of the state. And I think the goal of that was to help parents and kids make more informed decisions about what they were doing and where they were going to do it.
Interesting. And then I think one of the things, this is Jenny Jarvis from Montana, and she was, how do states get the word out? And that's always a challenge at the federal level, at the state level, getting information spread about all the things that we have freely available to us anyways. So, and this is not, so the SLDS folks get to see a lot of states work, so they can share that. But if anyone has good ideas about this, please do also throw your voice into the conversation.
Yeah. And definitely, I mean, I would definitely reach out to your state SLDS team, because I know that some states do data conferences annually, and they just might not be inviting all of the people who might be interested in attending. I think everyone, me included, you have your own personal Rolodex. That's dating myself, but some version of a context file. And
Right.
it may just be some folks are not in the conversation, not deliberately, but just because you're not. So I would absolutely say to reach out to the SLDS folks in your state.
One special thing, Nancy and Carla, about the SPDIG is that they are required to have a contract or subgrant with an OSEP funded parent center in their state. So either a parent training and information center or a community parent resource center, which is not in every state, but some states do. Those are more specialized. But so there's already a relationship there with parents, and certainly they have a lot of other partners as well. So maybe that could be helpful for the SLDS folks. Great. And then I'm not entirely sure if Leslie's earlier question was answered either, or her musing. I know it's challenging for data to be shared across systems within a state, particularly for an individual. Have any states solved that problem? And Carla's response may have been somewhat to that, the profile of the state data capacity.
Yeah, there was, she mentioned that some states have solved it by connecting through the DMV records, which
great.
depending on the states could work. I mean, I'm thinking New York City.
Yeah.
That wouldn't help so much.
Yeah, it's definitely helped more in Idaho and Iowa than,
Yeah, part of my other work outside of this is interagency collaboration. So talking to states about data barriers to effective collaboration. So that's why it piqued my interest, how some states have solved it.
Great. Thank you, Leslie.
Yeah, and I would say that some states can use social security numbers. I think it's fewer and fewer now. But there's also just agency agreements that go into place that allow them to make those connections. And then they have to, do some encryption and some other things and get rid of those keys that, made those connections. So there's a variety of ways that states are tackling this to be able to, legally, safely, and all the things, make those connections to be able to, share insights and be able to answer those cross-agency questions that folks are interested in.
And sometimes we hear that, like states are often, they think that FERPA or something would prevent state like data sharing more than FERPA does is a common thing that we hear. So I think if you ever have any questions about how to link or share data, we also have, I think we had the Privacy Technical Assistance Center on our collaborator slide, but there are folks based out of the Student Privacy Office, and their job is to help states think through the thorny issues of linking data safely while protecting student privacy. So if you do have questions about how to do that, they will review documents, policies, procedures, and sort of compare them to best practice and give you some insights into like how to think about how to do the work. I think most of the SLDS teams are talking to PTAC. We definitely have PTAC review documents for the SLDS teams, but if anybody else has any questions about student privacy, PTAC's a good place to go.
Yeah, same thing. Carla and I just posted pretty much at the same time the link.
Great minds think alike. Thank you.
And just so everyone saw that Amanda provided a good example that a school district had a family data night where they went over data points like state testing and such with them. Yeah, because it really needs to be, I feel this way on a lot of things. There's some things I just need a conversation about, right? Like just me reading it is not gonna be sufficient. And I need to be in conversation. It's great.
Yeah, Jennifer, we even would go as far as to say a lot of times even just the word data is off-putting for people, that they think that, you know, I'm not a data person, I'm not a math person, I don't know what you're saying. And, you know, that's a barrier right there. So we often, as we work with our states, and again, having formerly been in a state, you know, we just used information as much as possible when we were talking about, you know, trying to figure out outcomes. And otherwise it was like, well, what's the information that we can look at to help us understand what's happening around that? And I think for a lot of the states that have dashboards that have a parent component, you can see they've put a lot of thought into the ways that they are messaging so that it isn't, you know, a lot of, you know, it's not education-ese, it's not data-ese, it's not this emperor's new clothes. Veronica, as you were talking about your experience, you know, from same thing when I was in the classroom, it was just, you know, our administrators like, well, analyze the data and tell us what's going on. It was like, well, that's not helping. Don't just tell that, you're not telling me anything what to do. And it just felt like this, like, look over here kind of a thing, as opposed to what do we mean when we say that and how is it helping? And so I think getting better language around all of this work, in that we're making things more accessible, more approachable for people, is one way that hopefully we're helping to, you know, demystify this notion of data for, you know, nefarious reasons or something like that.
Yeah. And I like it. Amanda and I were thinking the exact same thing about making data consumable, because that's been our book study on making numbers count. Amanda, did you want to add anything?
Well, I was just thinking that with stuff like the state longitudinal data system, is that sometimes what becomes a problem is there's almost so much data that it's overwhelming and people shut down. And I think that we need to come from a place of what are the essential questions we're trying to answer? Like maybe take some problem solving and kind of go through, you know, utilize our data informed decision-making processes and kind of start with some basic research questions of like, what do we want to look at? And maybe let some questions guide our analysis. But I think the biggest problem is people don't understand data. We sometimes make assumptions about people's data literacy that can be a little bit incorrect. And then I think the other thing is that almost too much information can shut people down. Is almost worse than not enough information. So how do we, like we've been doing in the book study, how do we make the numbers impactful and get the gist so people get the right information to help them make the decisions they need to make?
Yeah. And to some extent, it's also asking teachers and other people using the data what they think they want. I mean, like what questions, and I think that's why we had what questions would you like to answer? Because I think at the end of the day, that should be driving what gets provided so that people don't get overwhelmed or distracted. Just give them what makes the most sense at that moment. I was
going to share with you, this is Becky from Minnesota. And when I was a building principal working in a school that was needing to make improvement, we had training around the data-driven dialogue. And I see you shaking your head, Amanda, but it was so helpful because we would start with predictions. And so when we would have multiple perspectives coming in, people started with the predictions, and then there were guiding questions for the predictions. But then we would place the data on the tables and people had to go visual. So their predictions, if they were predicting the percentage of students graduating on an IEP, that are African-American, they would have to then go grab that data, look at it, and then create a visual and share that visual back. And then from there, they went around and made observations, and the observations had to have numerical data to it. And then we did the inferences. And it was so helpful that I can't say, it was so amazing starting with the predictions and engaging them in that dialogue.
We've been using the same thing, like we've been working on that even at the state level. We've been using it at our state level meetings of going through that same process that we're teaching our districts and schools to use and trying to use it to guide, because, you know, trying to practice what we preach, it makes it more likely that we're going to use it and train and coach around it if we're all using it. Sometimes the problem is still not having the right people at the table, I've heard.
Yeah, and I was going to, Nancy had mentioned the Common Education Data Standards, and one of the things that, as part of the SLDS state support team, along with our partners, we work to utilize the Common Education Data Standards to develop something that we call connections, which this is going to look like a lot of words on the screen, but just bear with me. What we've done is bring work groups together for them to ask key questions that they have related to students or otherwise. So we had an SLDS employment outcomes indicator work group come together. And the key question they wanted to be able to answer with their SLDS is what percentage of post-secondary or program completers are employed in the state? And their job was to come up with the method that any state could use to be able to answer that question. And so this tool lets you click in. And again, it's a whole bunch of technical stuff, but what it does is give you a little bit of background about the question. It gives you a description. It tells you what data elements you need to be able to answer this question. And then it also tells you, here's a recommended analysis. And so we have groups that come together because, again, this is like everyone thinks you ask a question and automatically you're going to have an answer. This helps illustrate that it is complicated. There's a lot that goes into it, but there are steps and there's a process, and we can help bring groups of people together to answer questions of interest. And so the CEDS connections, I think, are one way that really helps to illustrate how complicated it is to ask a question like this one, which is, give me, what's the percentage? You're thinking it's a number. It's just a quick calculation. Well, not so fast. And so that also can help us, just show the complexities and why the conversations are really important and how the community can come together to help build these kinds of questions.
Yeah. And I just want to point out that Carla just shared my new favorite word of the week. Did anyone catch that one? Automagically.
Yeah, that we often said that when we would get questions from the when legislative session was in, and they would say like, well, just like give us the data on this like hugely complex thing. We were like, okay, yeah, we'll just press that automagic, not the easy button, the automagical button to make all of the answers, appear. Right.
It might take my favorite has always been supposedly, which is from Friends. And I use it every once in a while. And I wonder if people really think, anyways, I don't care. I love saying it. So automatically and supposedly. Right. Yeah. And I'm just going to circle back around to the student privacy, because it made me think of it, Carla. I hear from some states, the legislators want this information, and we've been told various times that we can't have access to it, or we don't have any money to support this, or you can't use these systems that would help you actually look at it, but now we want it. And it's challenging, but I did appreciate knowing that I didn't actually know that TA Center existed about student privacy. So that's one barrier that I've heard come up that could be helped, maybe removed with that.
Definitely.
They're quite friendly.
Yeah.
It's the TA arm. So you can also bring them like, holy cow, I think this thing went wrong, and they'll give you help.
Okay. We love that. It has been, I agree with Amanda. This has been a really good conversation, and with Mike, that's powerful. I think we are probably going to have more questions. And so I love that we now have this relationship going, and so we can throw questions your way. Thank you to Kaylee for bringing the idea to us in the first place. I have a feeling that won't be the last great idea Kaylee has for us. Now that you get to be on that outside observer perspective.
I'll keep thinking of more so I can attend as many directors' webinars as possible this year. That's my goal.
You're always welcome. Always. So I wanted to ask, we have one final question. John, do you have the poll related to the LMS question?
Oh my goodness, I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
No, that's okay. So why don't we just do it for those who are on, and we can ask the question again next time, just in case there are people who had to drop off. One of our project directors for the SPDIG was interested in what folks are using for a learning management system. So he was asking if people are using Blackboard, which I haven't really heard people using Blackboard lately. I think it still exists, but I haven't really heard about it. I know Canvas is really popular. Yep, I see that there. But we just wanted to get a sense. And also Bridge R, I've not heard of that one. Or Bridgewood Island. Oh, it's specific to you all.
No, I'm sorry. It's Moodle. I
Oh,
should
a
have said
Moodle.
Moodle. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah, Moodle is popular. And does everyone like their system? Is it a good thing? Hopefully, if they've given it to us, they like it. Okay. Canvas, WordPress, Google Classroom. Oh, I haven't heard about Google Classroom being used lately. Okay, good. Yeah, Canvas is definitely seems like it's the most popular lately. Great. So we can share the chat, right? It was Tom Delaney who asked, and I don't think he's on anymore. So let's share it with him. Oh, Google Classroom, yeah. Yeah, definitely we have trouble sometimes with Google stuff with our